8. The Ghost Army. In January 1944, toward the tail end of World War II, the United States Army established its first-ever tactical deception unit. Nicknamed the Ghost Army, it was officially called the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops. The top-secret unit consisted of 82 officers and 1,023 soldiers, who spent the final year of the war tricking the Germans into believing they were a 30,000-strong force. They accomplished this using a variety of highly convincing visual, sonic, and radio deception tactics. Armed with only .50 caliber machine guns, these clever combat con artists carried out 22 large-scale deceptions against the Nazis. Due to the sophisticated nature of their missions, most of the Ghost Army's members had backgrounds in art or engineering, or were highly trained professional soldiers with advanced skills. With an average IQ of 119, they were one of the most intelligent military groups of all time. The Ghost Army's tactics included using inflatable tanks, jeeps, trucks, aircraft, and other vehicles that looked real, fake radio traffic and sound effects, and deploying bogus generals who passed as legit military officials. These methods worked incredibly well, effectively saving thousands of lives while driving the Germans crazy with false leads. Their work was highly classified. Even after the war ended, members of the Ghost Army were sworn to secrecy, and for decades, the military went to great lengths to conceal any sign of the unit. Its existence was finally revealed to the public in 1985, courtesy of a Smithsonian Magazine expose, and the matter was officially declassified during the 90s. When the Ghost Army's existence was finally no longer a secret, former members became more comfortable with the idea of openly discussing their service. During an interview with Princeton Alumni Weekly's Rick Bayer, U.S. military veteran Freddie Fox described the Ghost Army as a traveling roadshow that went up and down the front lines impersonating the real fighting outfits. But to understand how the clandestine unit came to be, first we have to rewind a little. 7. Operation Cascade. The Ghost Army's creation was at least partially inspired by the British military's use of deception in North Africa during an Allied mission codenamed Operation Cascade. It took place in 1942, at a time when British forces in the region were weak. To prevent an attack by the Axis powers, they had to rely on something other than actual members or force. By then, the British had already become seasoned at the art of deception. In 1941, the year before Operation Cascade commenced, an elite group called the Advanced Headquarters A-Force created 3 bogus units in the Mediterranean theater. Known as the 1st SAS Brigade, the 10th Armored Division, and the 7th Division, these phony regiments were designed to make the British presence in the Mediterranean seem bigger than it was. And the plan worked out well, which was why the Allies decided to try it again in North Africa when it became clear that they were actually at a disadvantage in the region. The purpose of Operation Cascade was to further increase the Allies' strength by building both their false and real presence. To create more bogus units, soldiers were sent to North Africa from their bases in the United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand, India, and South Africa. It was important for these fake groups to seem real, so the campaign's planners drew up crests, orders of battle, and all the other things that a person would expect to observe in a real unit. They broadcasted false radio traffic for enemy intelligence and civilian informants to pick up on. And it effectively gave off the impression that there were a lot more troops in the region than there actually were. The A-Force also had many of the civilian informants in their pocket as double agents who passed enemy information their way. Operation Cascade was deemed a sweeping success based on captured enemy documents, which showed that the Axis powers truly believed there was a large Allied presence in North Africa. An in-depth A-Team analysis that was concluded shortly after the campaign also concluded that it was successful, so it made perfect sense for the Americans to borrow some of these techniques when it came time to establish the Ghost Army. 6. Visual deception. In addition to the tactics used during Operation Cascade, the Allies utilized visual deception to fool the Axis powers during the Mediterranean and North African campaigns. These strategies came in handy long before the United States even joined the war. A few months after declaring war in 1940, Italy, an Axis power, invaded Egypt from Libya, opening up a new battlefront in the deserts of North Africa. In addition to the terrain and climate being difficult, there were few places to hide. This new landscape presented the Allies with a lot of challenges that they weren't used to dealing with. But showing weakness or vulnerability was not an option, so instead, they came up with clever ways to make themselves look more numerous, and therefore more powerful than they actually were. In other words, they decided to hide in plain sight. They did so through the clever use of camouflage and disguise. In 1941, British filmmaker Geoffrey Barkis was appointed the director of camouflage at the General Headquarters in Cairo. He was in command of specially trained engineers, officers, and other personnel, including artists, zoologists, and theater and film specialists. In one of their most brag-worthy feats, the deceptive unit disguised a water purification building to look heavily damaged in the wake of battles against the Germans, when there was really nothing wrong with it. As their strategies proved successful, the group expanded on its methods. They created phantom armies using dummy tanks, equipment, and soldiers, and they even installed fake railroads and pipelines. The unit also disguised trucks as tanks, and vice versa, through the use of wooden or canvas covers called sun shields. And as you're about to learn, the American Ghost Army borrowed more than a few pages out of the British A-Team's handbook when they decided to form their own deceptive regiment. 5. D-Day Operation Fortitude. Of the more than 20 operations carried out by the Ghost Army, their arguably most notable work took place during the Allied invasion of Normandy on June 6, 1944, also famously known as D-Day. Most members of the Ghost Army arrived in England in May in anticipation of the upcoming Normandy landings. Their main task was to distract the Germans by drawing attention away from Normandy. It would be a tricky endeavor, since the Nazis had long been anticipating a cross-channel invasion, and were therefore keeping a watchful eye on the area. Codenamed Operation Fortitude, the plot involved using fake tanks, ships, aircraft, and even dummy soldiers to make the Germans believe that the Allies were invading beaches that are located roughly 100 miles, or 160 kilometers, north of Normandy. The plan was carried out in several phases, or layers, by two phantom armies, one stationed in southeast England toward Calais, and the other in Scotland, under the guise that it was potentially headed toward Norway. Led by none other than the famed American Lieutenant General George S. Patton, the Phantom Army that was stationed in England seemed incredibly real by virtue of its leader alone. The decision to have Patton lead the bogus unit was an ingenious one, and it only added to the believability of all the props and other deceptive techniques that the Ghost Army employed to make an invasion of Calais seem realistic. A team of specialists staged the Phantom Army, dummy vehicles, and fake weapons at Dover, the closest point in England to Calais, and waited for the Germans to notice its presence, with some help from double agents who leaked false information to the Nazis to encourage them to check the situation out. In addition to the fake props and phony tips, the Allies purposely fled 2 missions over Calais for every single mission over Normandy to make it seem as though Calais was a bigger priority. And as the saying goes, the rest is history. Operation Fortitude was a sweeping success, along with D-Day, which helped further solidify the Allied path to victory in the war. 4. Previous uses of deception, camouflage trees. As impressive as the Ghost Army and the British military were for their accomplishments during World War II, deception has a long-held place in warfare. During World War I, the French, British, and Germans placed fake trees in the forest along their front lines. They were first used in 1915 by the French, who soon passed the idea along to the British. The Germans adopted the concept shortly thereafter. In many cases, the fake trees were replicas of real trees near the front line that had been damaged during battle. Engineers photographed and measured the destroyed tree, which was then recreated by artists using wrinkled and painted iron as bark, along with textured materials such as pulverized shells, since, after all, a perfectly unharmed tree might look a little out of place. These replicas were extremely detailed and looked exactly like the real trees they were designed after, right down to their broken and intact branches. The process of creating them was time-consuming and complex, and it was carried out in complete secrecy. To avoid being spotted by the enemy, troops removed the real tree and installed the camouflage version under the cover of night. Each false tree was hollow and served as a spy station. They were lined with armored tubes to protect the soldier inside. There was a seat near the top of the trunk for the occupant to perch themselves on, as well as a cleverly disguised mesh viewing hole. The soldier would observe his surroundings through a periscope or telescope and report the details to troops on the ground. 3. Razzle-dazzle. Starting in the early 20th century, the British occasionally painted their warships in a psychedelic, brightly colored type of camouflage called razzle-dazzle. It wasn't meant to hide targets, but to make them visually confusing to the enemy. In addition to featuring wild colors, Razzle-Dazzle consisted of contrasting lines and shapes going in various directions. This made it difficult for an enemy to figure out important details such as the type of vessel, its size, how fast it was going, and in what direction. Each Razzle-Dazzle ship had a unique pattern and color scheme. One featured red, gray, black, and white angular shapes. Another had more curved shapes in blue, black, and white. There was also a zebra print ship and one that was painted like a brick wall. Although the Brits can be credited with starting the Razzle-Dazzle trend, the Americans also used it. In 1904, the U.S. Navy launched the USS Nebraska, which had a contrasting chevron pattern on its hull and smokestacks. A dozen Navy warships were eventually covered in crazy patterns and colors. Razzle-Dazzle reached its peak popularity during World War I, especially among the British Royal Navy. One newspaper reporter described the radically patterned warships as a flock of seagoing Easter eggs, while another referred to them as floating cubist paintings. Only a few of these eye-popping ships survive today. 2. A ship disguised as an island. On February 27, 1942, the Allied naval fleet was defeated by the Japanese Imperial Navy in the Battle of the Java Sea. In the days following the crushing battle, the Japanese sank 3 of the 4 remaining Dutch ships in the Java Sea. The slow-moving, 184-foot-long, 25.6 meters minesweeper Kreinsen was the last remaining ship. It was lightly armed, and therefore ill-equipped for battle, and floating in plain view of any Japanese aircraft or naval vessels that might pass by. The Kreinsen's best chance of survival was to flee from Japanese-occupied waters and toward Australia, except there was no way it could outrun a Japanese vessel. To sneak past the Japanese undetected, the crew of the Kreinsen came up with the unconventional idea of disguising the vessel as an island. The area contained over 18,000 small islands, and the ship was big enough to pass off as a small island, so the idea wasn't as far-fetched as it seemed. The 45-man crew stopped the ship at a nearby island, cut down as much vegetation as possible, and covered the vessel's entire surface area with foliage. They arranged the plants in a way that mimicked jungle vegetation, and painted any exposed metal in shades of gray to resemble rock formations. The ruse was surprisingly convincing, especially from a distance. Since islands don't move, however, the ship had to be careful nonetheless. During the day, it anchored close to actual islands and remained stationary. At nighttime, Kreinsen painstakingly crept toward Australian waters, finally reaching safety after 8 days, as the only Dutch vessel of its class to escape the hostile zone of the Java Sea. 1. Pink desert camouflage. During the late 1960s, the UK's Ministry of Defence contracted with the Marshals of Cambridge to outfit a fleet of 72 Land Rover Series 2A models for desert use. The vehicles were equipped with additional fuel tanks, upgraded navigation equipment, blackout lamps, search lamps, smoke grenade launchers, a general-purpose machine gun, an anti-tank weapon, flare guns, and more. Altogether, just one of the modified Land Rovers weighed over 6,600 pounds, 2,993.7 kilograms, even without doors, a windshield, and a roof. The new gadgets and gizmos were pretty impressive, but perhaps the strangest feature of the upgraded Land Rovers was their soft pink paint job. The British Army's Special Air Service, SAS, had determined that pink was the most effective camouflage color for use in the desert, so the bronze-green color scheme of the Series A2 models was replaced by a pacifying, almost pastel pink shade, earning the fleet the nickname of the Pink Panthers. They were used from 1968 until 1984. Today, just 20 of the original Pink Panthers are thought to still exist. Thanks for watching. Which one of these missions surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. See you next time. Bye.